you very much for joining us as schools from around the UK come together for the UK Youth Climate Summit to take action to create a more just, sustainable world and make commitments and pledges for the planet. Time is already running out to sort out the planet. You may have heard it referred to as a climate emergency. Unlike world leaders, however, young people are refusing to stop talking about it. Coordinated by the charity Global Action Plan and a team of teachers, the UK Youth Climate Summit is a week-long virtual festival of days and themed discussions and activities. The main topics of this festival of days are nature, oceans and water, travel, pollution and waste, food, farming and forests, fashion and consumption, and finally, a sustainable future. And on the fifth day, there will also be a closing summit. Today, our theme focus session is travel, pollution and waste. These three very different areas are so important in terms of how we can all play our part to make the world a more sustainable place. During this session, you will hear from a range of speakers from international to local travel and litter to waste management. But this session is about you. What can you do differently, better and why? And why might people not make those decisions? How might you be able to convince them to think global but act local? I want you to have a think about pledges you can make today, for now, and for your future self.
Been on a plane to travel abroad recently? Well, possibly not this year, but even just one annual flight abroad could be contributing massively to your personal carbon footprint. Flights produce greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide, from burning fuel. These contribute to global warming when released into the atmosphere. A return flight from London to New York emits over half a ton of carbon dioxide per passenger, which is about 11% of the average UK's annual carbon emissions. If you've listened to the inspiration session this morning, we learned that offsetting emissions and ecotourism can go some way to undoing some of that damage. But even better, could we find an alternative? Could we whale watch in Whitby instead of Canada, hike the Pennine Way instead of the Inca Trail, enjoy the beaches and ice cream of Cornwall instead of Greece and Italy, ski in the Cairngorms? The rise of staycation has opened many eyes to the variety of activities within the UK, and this can only be a good thing for the planet. If you're going to head overseas with your family, could you ask them to think about offsetting the carbon of your flight by looking at tree planting schemes, choose local hotels, eat local, shop local, and partake in activities that don't have a negative or social environmental impacts, i.e., why ride an elephant when you can see it in the wild? Or stay in a big hotel chain when you can stay in an awesome homestay or guest house? And then even more about the local culture and community. We need to think about the decisions and choices we make and how they impact the places that we visit. International travel will leave a footprint, so whilst you can reduce it as much as possible with the activities you choose and the choices you make, ensure that when you do travel, you do so with purpose and impact. And take it slow, getting to know one country in depth rather than rushing through 6. I'd like to introduce our first speaker.
Hello, my name is Mariana Zebrat and I work at Intercontinental Hotels Group, or IHG, a company with over 5,900 hotels across the world. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about international travel, the impacts it has on waste and pollution, what companies like IHG are doing to minimize these impacts, and finally what you can do to make your travel as sustainable as possible. As you know, people today travel for a number of reasons, but primarily this is either for leisure, so to visit friends or family or to see a new place, or for business, to go to a meeting, meet a new client, or start a new project. Travel and tourism has a lot of positive aspects, and it creates opportunities and employment for people around the world. However, there are several environmental issues that come with travel, particularly related to carbon emissions, waste, and water usage. Every time we travel, we create a carbon footprint, and this footprint will depend on how far we go. So, for example, an economy flight from London to Rome will create 273 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions round trip. Now, if you were to go further, somewhere like Singapore, say, then that would create just over 1,000 kilograms, or just over a ton, to go economy round trip. This is a significant amount when you think that the average person around the world creates 5 tons of carbon dioxide emissions each year. In fact, international travel is the primary reason why the top 1% of people around the world create double the amount of carbon dioxide emissions than the poorest 50% of people in the world. Another issue with travelling is that we tend to use more disposable items. For example, every time you take a flight, about 1.5 kilograms of waste is created from things like disposable water bottles, food containers, plastic bags, etc., etc. Not only is this a big use of resources, but this kind of waste can find its way into our oceans, causing problems to life underwater. This leakage can happen in a number of ways. For example, people can flush things like contact lenses or pads down the toilet, or place litter in open-top bins where it can be blown away into waterways. Finally, we tend to use more water when we travel, either because we're using swimming pools and other leisure facilities, or because we tend to have baths and longer showers when we are relaxing and away. The whole travel industry is becoming much more aware of its impact and trying to address these issues as much as possible. IHG is trying to look at energy waste and water usage across its hotels. The starting point for all of this is measurement. So IHG hotels track their usage every single month against a set target that they're given each year. In terms of carbon, IHG has also signed up to science-based targets, which means that it's committed to reducing its carbon emissions by what is required in order to meet the 2015 Paris Agreement. IHG is also updating its build standards to make sure that any new hotels that are built are as low carbon as possible. On the waste side, IHG is minimising food waste as well as its usage of single-use plastics. IHG have already removed all plastic straws and stirrers from their hotels and are in the process of replacing all of those small shampoo, soap and lotion bottles that you see with refillable ones. They're also rolling out reusable water bottles across the hotels. In addition to using more reusable items, IHG is also trying to upcycle waste by, for example, putting carpet tile that is made from recycled fishing nets. I expect the whole industry will need to get on top of these issues, particularly as there's likely to be greater transparency coming in the next few years to help guests make much more sustainable options. I wanted to finish up with some tips on how you can travel as sustainably as possible. And for this, I have recruited the help of my daughter's toy cupboard, so bear with me. When you're thinking about your next trip, do consider what you can do in 5 areas. Number 1, where you will go. Number 2, how you'll get there. Number 3, where you will stay. Number 4, how you'll get around. And number 5, what you will bring with you. So, starting with where you will go. To minimise your carbon footprint, try and keep your travel as local as possible. If you need to go far, for example to visit family in Australia, then maximise your trip and go less frequently. Number 2, plan out how you will get there and where possible, travel by train rather than by plane. If you need to travel by plane, then go economy, as travelling business doubles the impact. Whatever you do, don't get out the private jet, as that has about 8 to 10 times the impact of travelling economy. On the accommodation front, look for hotels or chains that are trying to reduce their footprint. Number 4, think about how you'll get around, and where possible, travel by foot rather than by taxi. Not only will it reduce your carbon footprint, but it will also allow you to discover much more about the place you're in. You could also hire bikes if you want to sort of go further. Finally, think about what you can bring to minimise your waste and put together a travel pack of reusable items. This could include a reusable water bottle, earplugs, a see-through wash bag, and a wrap to use as a blanket or pillow. To avoid any plastic finding its way into the ocean, make sure to never flush anything other than toilet roll down the toilet. Recycle what you can and put any litter you have in closed bins. Finally, if you want to go that extra mile, do some research before you go on the country and community you're going to visit and find out what issues they might be facing. You may be able to find some exciting projects or volunteering opportunities to get involved in.
Pollution is a word we hear a lot about, and is when harmful chemicals are admitted into the air or into water. It is burning certain fuels in certain ways that causes the most amount of pollution. If we bear this in mind, we can understand some decisions that local areas are taking. For example, Bristol is set to become the first city to ban diesel cars, which are more polluting than petrol cars. And cities like London and Manchester are building cycle network routes, and then there is the national plan to replace diesel and petrol cars by electric cars in the year 2040, or by the year 2040. Internationally, we see that notoriously polluted cities are using the COVID recovery to improve air quality. And at a local scale, schools are making changes to improve air quality outside their gates. This might be something you can look to improve in your own school. We need to make some choices to reduce these pollutants by thinking about the ways in which we travel to school. If you drive, why not car share? And if you car share, why not take the bus? And if you take the bus, why not cycle or walk? And if you cycle or walk, why not take a new scenic route and gain the benefits of nature at the same time as getting to school? And if it's longer, you'll be even healthier physically and mentally due to more exercise and the benefits of nature on our mental health and well-being. Why does it have to be just a journey or commute to school? Why not enjoy slow travel, take in the sights and sounds of the local wildlife? All of these changes will reduce the amount of pollution, reducing greenhouse gases, and therefore having a positive impact on climate change. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who will be talking about clean air.
Good morning, and thank you for joining this session for today's focus on travel, waste and pollution. My name is Martin Lauder and I'm a Clean Air Programme Manager at an environmental charity called Global Action Plan. I'm excited to be kicking off the air pollution section for today alongside our youth ambassadors. Today is very exciting because it marks the day that hundreds of schools from across the UK are coming together to tackle air pollution. My role at Global Action Plan is to raise awareness about how air pollution can be tackled by everyone. In fact, we run an event you might have heard of called Clean Air Day. Now, Clean Air Day is when people from across the UK, not just schools, but charities, universities, health organisations, businesses, community groups, thousands of individuals come together. There are three key things that can help us tackle air pollution. Number one is each of us making changes to our day-to-day lives. Number two is sharing useful hints and tips. And the third one is using our voice to call for change from decision makers. So firstly, a big thank you for turning up today and taking the first step in tackling air pollution. Now, air pollution can come from many different places. One of the biggest sources of air pollution comes from road transport, so petrol and diesel, lorries, cars, delivery vans, you name it. Now, you might have noticed that over the summer and the past few months, your family might have not been using the car as much as they once had. Maybe you've been enjoying the summer weather and you've been cycling or scooting and just staying active. Well, did you know that we've actually seen lower levels of air pollution around the UK over the last few months? And the main reason for this is because it's the joined up effort of all of us and all the actions we're taking. Cycling rates have increased by 30 to 40%. And actually, the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles are down by 30%, with electric cars well over 100%. Now, as the months get a bit colder and a bit wetter, I encourage all of you to keep up the momentum and build these healthy actions into habits. They don't just improve air quality, but they can be really fun as well. We actually did some research with the University of Manchester this summer, and we found that clean air can actually improve your memory. Now, how useful is that when your school and your teachers are asking you to study? In this section, I wanted to mention the importance of your student voice. To make change happen, a super effective way to do this is to use your student voice. Encourage decision makers in your school or in your community to make air quality improvements across your local area by campaigning on issues that matter to you. So it could be asking your head teacher to install more cycle or scooter parking at school so that everyone has a safe place to leave their scooter or bike when at school. You could go a step further and ask your head teacher to arrange a school street, which is when the street outside your school is closed to cars, giving more space for cyclists and pedestrians. Or you could take some inspiration from some of the schools we worked with earlier this year, and you could go even further still. Why not write to some of the largest car manufacturers in the UK and asking them what more they could be doing to stop and help switch from polluting petrol and diesel vehicles to electrics and hybrids? And so finally, I wanted to leave you with my top 3 tips for tackling air pollution. Number 1 is keep active. Keep up the momentum, walk and cycle as much as you can. Second, help educate each other with hints and tips. And then finally, be vocal. Use your student voice, get involved in local decision making. Now, if we all do these things, we can all make a difference to the air we breathe. We all have a part to play to keeping our air clean. Now, I know there are some wonderful activities coming up, so a big thank you to our youth ambassadors. Stay tuned and enjoy.
Single-use plastic is now a phrase we hear on almost a daily basis. David Attenborough's Blue Planet 2 documentary woke the nation up to the scale and dangers of single-use plastics entering the oceans, and a huge shift occurred in our attitudes and the government's attitudes to this problem. This is an area which has had the most action of any environmental issue and shows how the combined power of people, companies, and the government can make a real change. Not only have ideas such as plastic bag charges encouraged us to reuse our bags, but they have also alerted us to the packaging our food comes in. Only last month was the ban on plastic straws and other single-use plastic items introduced, and the first British supermarket is now set to shortly be completely plastic-free for their fruits and vegetables. Did you know plastic carrier bag sales have dropped more than 95% in England's main supermarkets since the 5p charge was introduced in 2015? Also, did you know that plastic is made using palm oil? So each time you use a piece of plastic, it comes from a plantation that has caused deforestation and destroyed habitats, such as those of our ancestors, the orangutan. If we continue to use these products, they will continue to be made, and so forests will continue to be destroyed. As a society, we need to embrace this change. We grew up with the 3 R's of recycling: reduce, reuse, and recycle. In the last few years, a 4th was added, repurpose, and now we must consider a 5th, refuse. By refusing first, we can stop the plastic being consumed, and if enough of us did it, then a systematic change could take place. I'd like to introduce our next speaker who will talk about the problem of plastic litter on beaches.
Okay, let's start with a big question. What are plastics and what's the problem with them? Plastics are made from fossil fuels, which we drill out of the ground, process and refine and turn into polymers. Polymers are molecules which are long, branching, flexible hydrocarbons. These are easily moulded into different shapes. This makes plastic really useful as a molecule, as it can be adapted to almost anything. It's used in every part of our lives, from the packaging our food comes wrapped in, to the phones that we use, to our clothes, and to the medicine we take. Plastics are everywhere. Global production of plastic has doubled every decade due to high demand, and 9.2 billion tonnes of plastic has been created since the 1950s. So what's the problem? We've created this wonder molecule that's cheap, easy to use, and can be used in absolutely everything. Well, that's the issue, is it's used in everything and we can't get rid of it. Every single piece of plastic that has ever been created still exists today. Plastic is never destroyed, it's simply broken down into smaller and smaller fragments. So what happens when this man-made material enters into the environment? Well, plastics can enter the natural environment in many different ways. For example, single-use plastics such as straws, cups and plastic bags are simply thrown into landfill and buried after one use.
Other plastics, such as those in face washes or toothpastes or in our clothes, when they're washed, enter the waterways and go into the oceans. These are then capable of wreaking havoc throughout the marine ecosystems. Creatures living in the oceans, such as fish, turtles, whales, and even corals, have been known to mistake plastic particles floating in the water column for food. To a turtle, a plastic bag looks really similar to a yummy jellyfish, so it gets confused and eats it. In the last 20 years, the leatherback turtle population has declined by 95%. When these creatures eat large amounts of plastic, their stomachs become so full of plastic particles that they can't eat food, and they starve to death. We've seen this on countless numbers of times when seabirds and whales have washed up on our beaches filled with pollution. Due to the shape of these plastic polymers, they're able to absorb toxic chemicals into their molecular structure. So when the plastics are engulfed and eaten by these creatures, the toxic chemicals are released into their bloodstream and their tissues. This is having disastrous effects on their health, stunting their growth, preventing reproduction, and even causing cancerous mutations. Even when a large fish hasn't eaten any plastic, it often eats a smaller fish which has. This passes the toxic chemicals up the food chain. This process is known as bioaccumulation, and ultimately humans are at the top of that food chain. Unless we take action, by 2025, for every 3 tons of fish in the ocean, there'll be 1 ton of plastic. These are the sad, horrific truths about the impacts that humans are having on our ocean life. So what can be done to stop this? The biggest thing we can do as individuals is take a look at our actions and the impacts they're having on the planet. When we throw something in the bin, it doesn't magically disappear. Our waste is simply moved to somewhere else. We've lost touch with our waste and we're not directly seeing the impacts it's having. Think about how many single-use plastics are thrown away every day without a second thought. Recycling also is not the solution, as 91% of plastic isn't even recycled. It simply gets downgraded and thrown away. The solution is to create less plastic in the first place, so less ends up in our oceans. I've come up with 4 simple swaps that we can all make to reduce our single-use plastic consumption. If everyone makes these small changes, it will add up to a greater impact. So, number 1 is to carry a reusable water bottle instead of buying a single-use plastic one when you're thirsty. Plastic water bottles, so a litre plastic bottle, takes 250 millilitres of oil to create it. That's just illogical. If you buy a good quality reusable water bottle, it can last a lifetime. Mine's made of metal and I've had it for 3 years. It's been halfway around the world with me and even dropped off the back of a tuk-tuk. So it goes to show if you buy a good one, it will last you forever. The second thing to buy or to have with you is a reusable shopping bag like this one. These again can last a lifetime if looked after well and are so much better for the environment than a plastic bag. Globally, 2 million plastic bags are thrown away every minute. This is an incredible amount of plastic that is unnecessary and completely avoidable. Number 3 is a reusable face mask, which is very important in the current climate. You can stay safe in a pandemic without having to create single-use waste. If you do, for whatever reason, find yourself with a single-use face mask, after use, make sure that you cut the ties, because otherwise wildlife can get caught in here and it's a choking hazard, whereas this is easier for them to escape from. Number 4 is carry a reusable lunchbox or bring your own lunch to school with you. You don't need to get a Tesco ready meal wrapped in plastic when you can make a sandwich at home and just carry it with you, take the box home and wash it. This saves on a lot of money and plastic. If you really want to reduce your waste, the best thing to do is take a look through your bin and see what you're actually responsible for throwing away. Everyone is different and creates their own waste, and it's really important to evaluate what you're throwing away and see how you can change that. If you want to find out more, there are so many amazing resources online, including the Surfers Against Sewage and the Marine Conservation Society. They have some really key information about what we can do. There are certainly some barriers to change, and plastic can seem completely unavoidable at times. I learned that the hard way when I went to university. I thought moving away from home I could be the perfect eco-warrior, creating no waste and being as carbon neutral as possible. I plan to buy all my whole foods in bulk, free of plastic, and get my fruit and veg from a local market. But sometimes this just isn't possible. It's difficult when time and money are tight. You have to make quick and easy decisions which are often wrapped in plastic. But it's important to remember that you don't need to be perfect when you're trying to make a change. Every small action adds up. The main thing is to be conscious of the effects you're having. Every small change can add up to have a global impact. The most powerful thing you can change is your own mindset. So get educated and educate others. Knowledge is power when it comes to protecting the environment. As Robert Swan once said, the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. So be that someone and set an example.
In the UK, we send 15 million tonnes of waste to landfill each year. We need to think about our general waste, food waste, and now the world's biggest problem, mobile phones and laptops. More than 4 million phones are sold a day, and 85% of them end up in landfill. The ones that do get recycled are done so using toxic chemicals and heavy metals, which are released into waterways, killing local plants and animals, not to mention harming the workers themselves. IT is now one of the biggest contributors globally towards greenhouse gas emissions at 4%, with fashion behind it at 3% and travel contributing to 2%. This includes the production, shipping and storage. So next time you have tech FOMO because a new phone is being released, think about if you actually really need it, or what you're going to do with the old devices. Food waste is also a big problem. When we do think about waste, we can often fall into the trap of assessing waste based on its biodegradability and subsequent persistence in the environment. Food waste, therefore, might be considered a low concern. However, we know that we shouldn't waste food, because as well as the food itself, the resources that went into producing, transporting and preparing and packaging that food is all wasted. Then, once food waste goes to the landfill, it ends up being broken down in the absence of oxygen, which therefore ends up releasing methane gas, a greenhouse gas more damaging to our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. Food waste is problematic from both a retail perspective, with out-of-date food being thrown away, but also in our homes. We buy too much. Maybe we have a just-in-case attitude, or a larger pack works out cheaper than a smaller pack even though we won't get through it attitude. We plan our meals without necessarily incorporating the fact that only 2 eggs will be needed, despite 6 being in the pack, or forgetting that the half pack of vegetables that we will use later in the week might not survive that long. At our school lunches, we might get an extra large portion, but end up leaving half of this because the break time snack filled us up a bit too much. Food waste is therefore one of the things that we have huge control over. Food waste that doesn't even make it to the shelves. What's the solution there? You should look at local farmers markets, local suppliers, and buying fresh in-season produce, therefore reducing waste, packaging, and food miles. A team of recycling experts, Recycling for Greater Manchester, have agreed to answer some questions from eco-enthusiasts in our schools. So I will now hand over to them.
Go. Hello, I'm Alison, one of the education officers here in Greater Manchester, looking after all your recycling and waste and helping people to know what is the right thing to do.
Why do you think people do not recycle?
I think there's lots of reasons why people may not recycle as much as they should. One of the reasons could be they live in a different sort of house, maybe an apartment where they haven't got room to have the bins outside that the councils give them to collect the items in. So it's not possible for them to recycle as much. Maybe some people genuinely don't know what can go in the right bins, so they need to be looking at the leaflet that the council have given them. And maybe some people have different things in life that they care about more than recycling. And those people, we need to help them to realise that recycling is important.
How are you encouraging people to recycle as much as possible?
I think it's important that people know where to get the right information. So they might have leaflets from the council. There might be websites they can look at that have all the information on. The council might come knocking on the doors to help people to understand what can go in the bins. In Greater Manchester, we do visits to some of the recycling centres as well and work with schools and colleges and community groups and get them involved in looking at the bins and what goes in them.
Do you think that it is time that every local authority around the country had the same recycling guidelines, making it easier and less confusing for people to recycle? Is anything being done to put this into practice?
That's a really hard question. It's not very easy for everywhere in the country to do exactly the same thing. So we've got to send your recycling to different processing plants or factories where it's going to get made into new stuff. And those factories are not all in different parts of the country. So some places like Cornwall might not have anywhere to send plastic bottles, whereas us in Greater Manchester, we do. So it's not as simple as everybody being able to collect all the stuff in every single part of the country. What's being done about that in the future is the government at some point may have to look at that and decide that they do want a standard set of materials to be collected, but they are then going to have to help companies set up that are going to collect that material and make it into new things. So that's easy for different places in the country to do the same thing.
Are you finding ways to reuse items instead of just recycling things?
Well, in Greater Manchester, we're going to be opening little places called reuse hubs where we're going to mend items and get them reused. But again, that's really difficult. Not everybody in the country can do that. And actually, reuse starts with the people at home. So maybe I'd be asking you that question. Are you finding ways to reuse items at home? Can you turn a plastic bottle into a bird feeder? Can you turn an egg box into a jewellery holder? There's lots of ways that you can reuse items so that you're not throwing them away. And that helps you reduce your waste as well. So I think everybody has to do the reuse.
We hope that in our whirlwind tour of transport, pollution and waste, you have learned something new and been inspired to make some positive and sustainable changes. These topics are so important and need action from all of us to make our planet as green as possible.